Good evening to you all. My name is Laura Raj, and today the session is going to be about communication. What part of communication are we covering today? We are looking at three different things. One is how to meet people and how to greet them. What are we going to say to them when we're meeting them? We're also going to look at how to say goodbye and how to close a conversation. We're also going to talk about what are we going to say in a situation where we want to thank somebody, or if somebody wants to thank us, what are we going to reply? And then finally, we get into a little bit about handshakes, how to understand a person's handshake, what to understand from that, and also how to give the perfect handshake. So these are the things that we're going to cover in today's session. And if you have any questions and if you have anything that you would like to ask me, please feel free. You can always ask it at the end of the session. There is a little chat box which you can enter your questions into that, and I'll be happy to take the questions in the last 15 minutes of the session. So as you can see, we're going to start off with how are we going to meet and greet people. Now, the most common way of meeting and greeting, and I would say also the most professional way in a business environment or in a professional environment, is to greet a person by saying good morning or good afternoon or good evening. So these are the different three aspects when it comes to the time of day. If it is in the morning till about 12 o'clock, you would say good morning. There are certain people also who wish people with good noon, and it is acceptable to say that when you're meeting people. And then from 12 noon onwards till about 4 o'clock or sometimes even 5 o'clock, people greet by the time of day and they say good afternoon. And then of course, lastly, if it's anything after that, then people call it good evening. I will give you one tip, however, and that is you don't greet a person by saying good night to them. Even if it is 9 o'clock in the night, you would not greet a person by saying good night, because good night really is like a closing rather than a beginning. So if, for example, somebody says good morning to you or says good afternoon or good evening, the best way to reply will be by following suit. By following suit, I mean you would exactly copy what the person says and say it back to them. So let's just write that down. Good morning, and how you would reply is good morning to you. So if somebody says good morning, you would reply good morning to you. Good afternoon, you would also reply good afternoon. Now let's take the next option or the next alternative, and when somebody just says a very, very pleasant general hello. Now if it is to one person, we would just say hello. If it was to more than one person, for example, it was 3 or 4 people, then it would be better to say hello everyone or hello everybody. Now in a case when somebody greets you like this, what you would reply is, again, you would follow suit and you would also say hello. That would be the best alternative when somebody was greeting you like this. Now very often in a very business world scenario, we also sometimes are asked, how are you? And what are we going to reply over here? If somebody says, how are you? What you'd say is, I'm fine, thank you. And what a lot of us say is we just keep it as this, I'm fine, thank you. But actually the correct way to answer this would be, I'm fine, thank you. How about you? Remember, when somebody is greeting you and when somebody is asking you how you are, it's only good manners for you to ask the person back, what about you? So remember, I'm fine, thank you. How about you? Now sometimes the other alternative is that sometimes you could also mention, I'm good. I'm good, thank you. This is a little bit more recent. More people are using the word good when it comes to asking about yourself. So if you would like to answer, I'm good, thank you, that's also fine. But don't forget to put how about you at the end of the sentence. Alright, we're moving on to the next one, and this is very, very formal, especially when it comes to meeting business clients, customers, and people ask you, how do you do? Now remember, how do you do is very similar to how are you, but it's a little bit more formal. So how would you reply to how do you do? Again, I'm very well, thank you. And again, how do you do? So we are again asking the person how are they and how do they do at the end of the sentence. How do you do? I'm very well, thank you. How do you do? Yeah. Now we are going to the next one, and that is pleased to meet you. So somebody meets you for the first time, obviously they will say pleased to meet you, I'm happy to meet you. Now very often we are wondering what to reply in a situation like this, and the mistake that we make is we say thank you. Remember, this is not the best place for you to be saying thank you. It sounds a bit arrogant, it sounds a bit conceited, like you are someone important and that's why you're saying thank you. The better way to respond to this will be, I'm pleased to meet you too. So what will you say? I'm pleased to meet you too. Now remember, this too at the end of the sentence is basically something that is a word we use a lot while communicating. That means that I am in exactly the same position as you. So that is why this too at the end doesn't mean the number 2, but it actually means too as in I'm also pleased to meet you. But we don't say I'm also pleased to meet you. More formally we say I'm pleased to meet you too. Another one that we use when somebody says I'm pleased to meet you is this word, and that is likewise. Now you may be wondering what likewise mean. Likewise is a word that we use which means I'm also pleased to meet you. So if somebody says great to see you, you can also reply likewise. I'm happy to meet you. You're absolutely free to say likewise. Likewise is just one word. It's such a simple word, and you can definitely respond to somebody greeting you by saying likewise. Yeah. All right. We're going to the last one, and that is how are you doing today? Now this is a little bit more casual. Somebody is meeting you and he's not such a big person. You're not such a big person. Somebody may just say, how are you today? How are you doing today? Or how are you today? And how would you respond? You would just say great. Right? Again, it's a little bit more casual, it's not so formal. And then you'll say, how about you? How about you? And that way you've asked the person back, how about you? So I'm going to just quickly recap all the things that we've just mentioned. Good morning. And the reply is good morning. Hello. And hello everyone. And I would definitely reply by saying hello. The next one is how are you? And the reply for that is I'm fine, thank you. How about you? Or what about you? Then how do you do? I'm very well, thank you. How do you do? Next, pleased to meet you. I'm pleased to meet you too. Or likewise. And there's one more which I don't think we have talked about, and that is pleasure is mine. Pleasure is mine means even though you are happy to meet me, but the pleasure actually is mine. That means you are more pleased than that person. So you can also use pleasure is mine. And the last one, how are you doing today? And the answer for that would be great. How about you? So here are a few different types of greetings, how you're going to meet people, how you're going to greet them, and these are the things that we can talk about when it comes to meeting. Now I'm going to just go on a little further before we get into talking about goodbyes, but I'm going to talk a little bit about when you meet somebody for the first time and when you're meeting them. It's very, very important to create a rapport with them. A rapport in the sense, a kind of a relationship, a kind of a connection. And for that, we need to get into talking and chatting a little bit about pleasantries. Now, I use the word pleasantries because you're not talking about very serious matters. You're not talking about politics, or you're not talking about the economy, or you're not talking about death. You're talking about something very, very casual, something very light, and something that is quite actually meaningful, not really meaningful. So we call this in English as pleasant conversation. Pleasant conversation in the sense we just are chatting about nothing in particular, but it's important to know what to say in certain situations before you actually get into the real business that is planned for the day. So what are the things that you can ask a person as in pleasant conversation? So very, very commonly you will find that people will ask you if it is a Monday morning, or even if it's a Tuesday morning. Very often they will ask you, how was your weekend? Or they can ask you, did you have a good weekend? Now let us assume that someone asks you that. How are you going to reply? How was your weekend? It was great. Yeah. And somebody says, did you have a good weekend? Again, you can say it was wonderful. But don't forget, you also need to give a little information about what you did over the weekend. Sometimes you can say it was great, I only slept, or it was great, I watched a couple of movies. You would need to give a little bit of information, because again, we're talking about creating a rapport, creating a bond between you and the person you're talking to. So also it's good for you to ask the other person about their weekend. So if somebody says, how was your weekend? It was great. I read a couple of books. What about you? So now when you ask what about you, we have an exchange of conversation. Remember, conversation is not like an interview where one person asks all the questions and the other person gives all the answers. And it's an exchange of ideas or views. So it's very important. Remember, when someone says, how did you like your weekend? And you say, it was great. And what about yours? Now, a lovely topic to speak about is also, if the person has come back from a holiday, you can definitely ask about the holiday. Another very neutral topic to talk about is the weather. For example, over the last couple of days, if it's been very hot, you can definitely have a pleasant conversation about that. All right, so what would you say? It's really been hot the last couple of days. Don't you think so? So when you ask that to somebody, immediately the person also talks about the weather. Or if it has been raining, then you can say, have you been enjoying the last few days? We've had some good rain in the evenings. And then you can ask the person and they would definitely reply to your answer. So how would you decide what topic to discuss? So remember, if it's a person who's come back from holiday, you'll ask him about his holiday. If it's a Monday or a Tuesday, you can ask about the weekend. If it's a Friday, again, you can ask him what his plans are for the weekend. For example, so what are you planning for the weekend? Any great plans that you have? And that way, you can also get into a pleasant conversation with somebody. And of course, last but not the least, we can talk also about the weather. Remember, we also said ask about how hot it is or how it's been raining, and then ask them how they have been enjoying the weather. So these are a few tips on how to start conversations, how to have a little bit of pleasant conversation. And I also want to give you a few tips about how to have a good conversation with a person, and what are the key tips when you're having a conversation. Now, the first important tip is, when you're conversing with somebody, it's very, very important for you to maintain eye contact. Remember, if you're wanting to have a connection with somebody, or if you're wanting to have that bond and rapport created, you need to be able to maintain eye contact. So it's not about staring at the other person, but it is about having a relaxed look and maintaining eye contact with them. The other important thing is, keep a very pleasant look on your face, a smile or somewhat like a smile. If you're talking about the weather and it's not been that great, obviously you can't smile, but definitely keep a pleasant look on your face. Remember, people like to have conversations only with people who look friendly, and a smile can definitely make you look very, very friendly. The next tip that I can give you when you're making a conversation is, remember the person that you're talking to. Remember his name, because a name is the sweetest sound on a person's lips. So if the person has introduced himself, remember that person's name and call him by name. So for example, you're meeting Karthik, let's say. So you say hi, and then the other person, Karthik, also says hello, and then you introduce each other. And once he says, I'm Karthik, you can say, so Karthik, how was your weekend? Have you had a good time over the weekend? The minute you call the person by name, he immediately feels that connection with you. So that's another tip that I can give you to be a good conversationalist. The next tip that I'll give you is be a good listener. Now remember, it's sometimes our habit to think that we should speak a lot when we're meeting people. Of course, we should speak and we should exchange some ideas, but also remember that you need to keep the person who is with you also giving him an opportunity to speak back. So the important thing is to remember is to be a good listener. And another big tip which I feel is most important is always choose a neutral topic. Try to avoid choosing anything controversial. For example, if I'm meeting somebody and having a conversation with them, I wouldn't want to talk about world peace, or I wouldn't want to get into politics, or I wouldn't want to get into a controversial topic like bad roads. So you keep the topics very neutral so that there can be no controversies, especially when you're meeting people for the first time, and especially when you're meeting people in a formal scenario or environment. You don't want to have a clash, you don't want to have any loud words. So that is why you keep the topic extremely neutral. And of course, the last tip that I can give you is be encouraging. Be encouraging, ask a lot of questions. For example, if I say, how was your weekend? And you just nod your head, obviously you're not very comfortable opening up. So it's okay for me to ask you a question. I can ask you, so did you go and see a movie? By me asking a question, I'm encouraging you to speak. I'm encouraging you to have a conversation. And that is the main thing that you should remember when you're meeting and greeting somebody. So I want to just recap some of the tips that I have given you. And that is, you need to maintain eye contact with the person. Remember, call the person by his name or by her name. If you want to keep it formal, you can always call the person with the title and then his name. So you don't have to get into the first name, but you can definitely say Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so. And that way you can also call the person by the name. The next thing is be a good listener. Use a neutral topic, so don't talk about anything controversial. Always remember to ask a lot of questions. Have a pleasant look on your face so that people feel that you are somebody that they could talk to, and that way you can always make sure that people want to have a conversation with you. So these are a few tips that I have for you, and now we're going to talk about how to close the meeting or how to close the conversation. At the end of the conversation, what are you going to say? So we're going to just write it down, and we need to rub this out. So now we're going to work a little bit with how we are going to close a conversation, how we are going to end it. And the first way of doing this is that we can just say, great seeing you. Sometimes you will also have a person saying, instead of seeing you, they will say, great meeting you. So if somebody said, great meeting you, what are you going to say? All right, you can definitely say, the pleasure was mine. Or you can definitely say, great to see you too. And we can also say, see you soon again. Remember, when you're saying bye to somebody, it's also nice for you to have some reference about the future. If it was a really great meeting, obviously you would like to look forward to meeting the person again. So mention that also when you're saying goodbye. So if somebody says, great to have met you, great to have seen you, we can say, see you soon. or great to see you too. Alright, another way to end it would be just a very formal goodbye. And sometimes we kind of shorten that down and we just say the word bye. So both of these are fine, and if somebody said that to you, you could also reply by saying goodbye. And again, you could also mention see you soon again. Yeah, make sure that you mention something about the future. So see you soon again. The other one is, somebody can also say look forward to seeing you soon. So this again, when you're talking about looking forward to seeing the person in the future, it's a lovely way to end a conversation that you've had. So look forward to seeing you soon, and how you would reply to that is look forward to seeing you too. Or you could just casually say see you soon too, like this. See you soon too, or look forward to seeing you too. Sometimes people will also say thank you while they're saying goodbye. So if they say thank you, and here you can also mention thank you for your help, thank you for your hospitality, thank you for your hospitality. What is hospitality? Is if you have actually visited the person's office and you've gone out for lunch, you've gone out for maybe one meal, and they have actually paid for the meal. It is hospitality. So you can definitely say thank you for your hospitality, thank you for your help, thank you for your time. Sometimes if they give you a meeting for 1 hour, you can also say thank you for your time. Now in that case, what you can say is always thank you for your hospitality. You would reply most welcome. Yes, you can reply most welcome. Or you could also mention what we learnt earlier, the pleasure is mine. So most welcome, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for your time. If somebody says thank you for your time, what could you reply? You could say the pleasure was mine, or I'm happy to have met you. Again, you can reply saying I'm happy to have met you. So again, sometimes people also will just be quite informal and they will just say see you later. So if they say see you later, you could also reply I'll see you soon. So if it is a very casual reply, remember you can also keep it very casual. If they are trying to be a little bit more formal, then it's important that you can also be a little bit more important. So most welcome is a very nice way of ending it. See you soon, or look forward to seeing you soon. And sometimes people also say this, let me know if I can do anything else for you. So if you have helped them in some way and they want some more help, you can also end by saying let me know if there is anything else I can do. Very often we also say most welcome, glad that I could be of help. So most welcome, glad that I could help, or glad that I could be of some help. So these are the different ways in which you could close as you're meeting somebody, as you're thanking them, as you're saying goodbye. 2 tips to remember: if they are formal, you also keep it formal. If they are very casual, you can also keep it very casual and very relaxed. And remember, if you are meeting somebody, always have some kind of a reference point to the future. That means if you want to say thank you, always mention that I'd love to see you sometime in the future, or I'll see you soon again, very soon. So when you say that, obviously they feel that the meeting has gone on very well and that you have been happy to connect with one another. So these are a few ways in which you can close, and these are the few ways in which you can also thank people. So remember, as I was saying earlier, don't forget, if you do have any questions, or you do have a doubt, or somebody has actually greeted you in a way and you have not been able to reply the correct way, please do post your questions and your clarifications in that little box, and I'll be happy to take them at the end of the session. The last 15 minutes will be if you have any questions. So let me now move on, and we are getting into talking a little bit about introductions. Now remember, introductions is also part of a greeting. When you greet somebody and you say hello or good morning, the next thing generally that you do is you say your name. Now it's important for you to give your full name, even though you want people to think of you formally, or even if you want people to think of you very casually. It's okay that you want that, but you need to give your full name. So for example, if your name was, let's say, Dinesh Kumar, it's important for you to say, hello, I'm Mr. Dinesh Kumar. Give your full name, and then you could always mention, you could call me Dinesh if you prefer a person to call you by the first name, or if you could call me Mr. Kumar. So once you have given your full name, then the next sentence could be what you would prefer to be called. But remember, give your full name when you're making an introduction. Also remember, a name is not enough. A name is not sufficient, and it is not enough when you're giving an introduction. An introduction should also have a little bit of information about you. For example, where you're working, or where you're studying, or what your future plans are, or the fact of where that meeting is happening. For example, if it was happening in a company where you've gone for an interview, it could be that you could mention how eager you are to be part of the company that you're being interviewed by. So remember, an introduction is just not only the name, it could also be a few sentences about the person to who you're making the introduction. Next, I want to talk about when you are introducing two people to one another. Now this happens a lot in real life. You will be meeting many people from different walks of life, and you need to know how to introduce these two people who don't know one another and they only know you. So remember, you know both of them, but you need to introduce person A to person B. Now there are a few tips that I can give you when you're making these introductions, because sometimes when people are starting out in life, starting out their career, it's not a big deal who you're going to introduce first or how you're going to introduce the person. But as people become bigger and as people become more important, all these small things make a big difference. Who you're going to introduce first, how are you going to introduce that person, all becomes very, very important. So I'm going to give you a few tips. Now when you're introducing two people to one another, the first important rule that you're going to remember is the more important person gets introduced first. So for example, let's assume you're MD and a sales rep. If you were introducing them both to one another, the MD will obviously be introduced first. This is our MD, Mr. So-and-so, who's been our MD for almost 15 years, 20 years, and he's done wonderful things for the company. So you don't just give the MD's name. You also mention a few things about the MD, and then you'll say, Mr. MD, please meet the sales representative, Mr. Dinesh Kumar. He's just joined our company and he's been doing very well and he's got great targets that he has achieved. And you'll also mention something about the person who you're introducing. So what did we say? Senior person to the junior person. Now sometimes you may not exactly know what the designation is, but then you will take it according to the age. For example, the slightly more older person, the senior person, the older person to the younger person. Obviously the senior person will be of a higher standing most of the time, and that way you can play it safe by introducing the more older person to the younger person. Now sometimes you'll be in a situation where both are looking the same age and both are looking like they're the same designation. Now in that case, you don't have to be worried, you don't have to get stumped, because in that case you will introduce the person that you know better. Let's assume one person has worked with you for 3 years, another person has just joined for 2 months. You obviously know this person who's worked 3 years much better. So you will introduce him first to the other person who's worked for 2 months. Now all these rules that I have given you, one important rule keep in your mind at all times is client is king, customer is king. Customer always gets introduced first. So even if you're introducing an MD, your company MD, very important person, but you're introducing him to a customer who's half his age, it doesn't matter. Customer will always have to get introduced first. Even though this man is your MD, even though he's 50 years, 60 years, and the customer is only 30 years, it still is important to introduce the customer first. Why? Because the customer is king. Without the customer, we have no business. So that's the next rule. And the last rule, which will nullify all the rules that I have given earlier. Remember, we like to confuse it, right? So we're going to make you more confused by telling you when there is a lady involved. Now the rule is lady always gets introduced first. So even if you're introducing a very important person, but the other person is a lady, unfortunately you will need to introduce the lady first. So can we just quickly recap all these rules? Remember, senior to the junior, older to the younger, person that you know better sometimes to the person that you don't know. Customer is always king, so customer always gets introduced first. And lastly, all these rules go away unless and if it is a lady. If it is a lady, then we need to remember that ladies get introduced first. So with this, we have actually reached the end of introductions, and we've also talked a little bit about how you should introduce people. And we're going to move on to the last segment of today's session, and that is handshakes. So obviously, you've definitely given a handshake somewhere along in your life, and when you shook that person's hand, as you shook the person's hand, something would have played in your head. Oh, this person is like this, or that person is like that. Now, why did that happen? Only because when you were shaking the person's hand, the person shook your hand in such a way that it made you think of something about him. Because a handshake actually sometimes tells us a little bit about the person that we don't know so well. So remember, a handshake is a very common business-like practice. You can sometimes give it at the beginning of a meeting, or when you're meeting somebody, greeting somebody. You could also give it like a closure when it is coming at the end of the meeting or the event. So in the beginning or the hand or the end. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is that men generally feel very comfortable giving handshakes, and sometimes we are not really so comfortable and we don't know what is the correct thing to do when it is a lady involved. So I will give you a small tip. When there are two men, there's no problem, please shake hands. But if you are shaking the hand and there's another lady involved, the idea is that we let her initiate the handshake. So what I mean by that is, if she is feeling free to give you her hand, then you can take it and you will shake it. But let the initiation or let the starting point come from her. If she chooses to just wave and say hello, then you will have to accept that and you will not shake her hand. But I will say this, today we are working in a very general business environment. Women are feeling very comfortable to shake hands, and if there were 5 men and 1 woman, it would be better not to leave her out, and you will also shake her hand, because if she is going to be the only one in that group where you're not going to shake her hand, she may feel like you have missed her out and she may feel a little bit uncomfortable. So in a group, it's always better to just do and greet her like how you're greeting everyone else. But if it is just a one-on-one where you're meeting just one lady, then you wait. You let her decide, does she want to shake your hand? If she feels comfortable, she gives you a hand, then sure, you are most welcome to take it and shake it. Now sometimes a very important is that when you're shaking hands, it can also be a kind of a sign of respect. A lot of people in a high up situation do give their hand as a mark of respect, and it will be inappropriate for you not to give a handshake in certain situations. In certain cultures also, handshakes are not really that common. For example, in certain countries, the culture is that you would bend down and greet somebody. So in that culture, the Japanese culture, you don't have that many handshakes. And if you notice the people from the Middle East, you will definitely notice that people don't shake hands so much. Rather than that, they actually hug one another. So it is a little bit important for you to understand what the culture is in the place where you're greeting and meeting people. But if it comes to India, we are very comfortable with handshakes, and it is becoming very, very common, especially with younger generation, older generation, and whatever the social status is of the person, it does not matter. You can definitely give an enthusiastic handshake, and that would be fine. So we are a little bit talking now about the different types of handshake, and I'll just list them down, and then perhaps I'll also tell you what is the personality or what is the nature of the person when he takes your hand like that and shakes it. Now why do we do this is because sometimes you could be giving this handshake, and that is the opinion that people will be making of you. Or in some cases, somebody may give this handshake to you, and you will know a little bit about the hidden meaning of that person. So let's take the first one, and that is the pumping handshake. Now by this I mean, think about pumping water. It's done with a lot of enthusiasm, and it's done with a lot of energy. And think of a person shaking your hand with the same amount of energy, almost shaking your hand so much that it is falling off from your body. Now immediately when a person shakes your hand like that, very, very enthusiastically and almost like he's pumping water, it looks like he is very enthusiastic to meet you, very happy to meet you. But if he doesn't know you so much before, it could also mean that he wants to show you that he is the boss. He wants to take control of you and the handshake that you are giving. So we call this as the pumping handshake, a little bit of aggression, a little bit of enthusiasm, and sometimes it looks like he wants to take control. Now the next type of handshake that you may have definitely felt and shaken someone's hand, especially before a major event which is making you feel very nervous. For example, an interview, or it could be before a big speech that you're giving to a group of people in your college, and that is a handshake where the hand is shaking. It is also slightly wet because you're sweating so much, and it also feels very, very cold. So think about all the people whose hands you have shaken just before they're giving a speech or just before an interview. Definitely you would have had the shaking hand. We call it like a wobble, almost like jelly, and we call this the dead fish handshake. Now what I mean by that is the person's got a very cold hand. He's showing a lot of nervousness, he's showing a lot of fear. He's also feeling a little unsure of the situation, so therefore his hand is shaking and he's not very confident. So this kind of handshake is called the dead fish handshake. Now one tip I will give you is before an interview, when the interviewer actually shakes your hand, sometimes it's to see whether you have this dead fish handshake, because you may say words like I'm a very confident person, but then if they take your hand and it's shaking and it's feeling very cold and very sweaty, obviously the hidden meaning there is, even though you're saying you're confident, you do have a sense of discomfort or nervousness. So we call this as the dead fish handshake. Now the next one that I want to talk about is the gloved handshake or the politician's handshake. Now this is where both the hands take one hand and it is almost covered by both the hands, and you're going to enclose it with both your hands, and this kind of handshake is called the gloved handshake or the politician's handshake. And by this, people are actually telling you that I need something from you, you need something from me. So it's almost like a well-known English phrase, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. What can you do for me? What can I do for you? And that's why we call it the politician's handshakes, because most politicians, I mean, they do want to get something out of the whole thing. So we call this the gloved handshake, the politician's handshake. Sometimes you will also notice people in a higher up level giving this handshake to junior people, maybe for a little bit of encouragement and giving them a little bit of confidence. They will have this gloved handshake. So is it not nice? It's absolutely fine, and a lot of people do give it, especially when you're joining some place or you're a slightly higher up person, you will get this gloved handshake. The next one is, we call it as the body handshake. And simply by that I mean, apart from shaking the hand, you're also patting the person's back, or you may pat the person's, and when you're watching a cricket match, and when somebody has just taken a wicket, they will all go, they will shake his hand and they will pat his back. So this is a handshake that is given for a lot of encouragement. It is used to boost up your confidence levels. It is used when people are very casual with one another and very comfortable with one another, you can definitely give this body handshake. And the next one is the knuckle grinder handshake. Now, knuckle grinder, as you know, these are your knuckles, and when somebody comes and squeezes your hand very tight and you feel like almost your bones are breaking, it shows that the person wants to show his power, wants to show that he is in charge, he is the boss, so to speak, and that is why he wants to take your hand and squeeze it and show you that I am the boss. So this kind of handshake shows a little bit of aggression, shows a little bit of authority, and generally this handshake, we get a kind of a negative feeling about the other person. So be careful. If you are giving your handshake in a very hard manner, just lighten it out a little bit. Now, I may say lighten it out a little bit, but that doesn't mean that you give your handshake like a feather, because even a feather handshake is not a great handshake. People don't like it when you give a very flimsy handshake. They feel, what kind of person is this? What type of work will he do? What type of business is he going to do? And therefore, giving a good handshake and giving it nicely in that person's hand, giving your hand in such a way that it can actually get into the person's hand and you can actually feel the person's palm, that is a good handshake. So definitely, knuckle grinder handshake is on the other extreme. It's too rough, it's too harsh, it's too hurtful, but in the same way, don't give it almost like a feather touch. It has to have a nice firm grip. So let me just give you a few tips on this perfect handshake. How do I make sure that I'm giving the perfect handshake? So the first thing is, when you're giving your handshake, remember this part, the web of your hand, needs to fit into the person's web. So it's going to have a nice fit with you and the other person's hand. Once you have got that other person's hand in yours, you need to close your hand around it. Don't just keep it there lightly. Close it and make it nice and firm. He should feel your hand, not squeeze it, but just feel your hand. The shaking also needs to happen only from your elbow downwards. Remember, it's not your whole hand which is moving, but it's only your elbow downwards which is moving. And you're going to move it either once in one nice shake, or you can also do it 3 times. Obviously, if you have 10 people around, you can't do 3 times for everyone, but just one nice firm handshake in everybody's hand, that will definitely give a good impression about you. We call this as the palm down handshake. Now, just one last tip that I'd like to give you is, when you're shaking hands, very often we don't give the hand straight, but we generally just tilt it slightly, and you can either give your hand like this, or you can leave it upwards where the other person will take control of the handshake. So either upwards or downwards if you are taking control. You can decide whether you want to take control or give control. Sometimes the question is taken away from you when the other person gives you his hand first, and in that case all you have to do is follow what he is doing. So in that case you don't have to think at all, but if you are going to initiate the handshake, you can decide, am I going to take control or am I going to give control? Either way, it's absolutely fine. So different types of handshakes, we've talked about that, and we've also talked about the different styles that you can have. We've talked about greeting people, and we've also talked about meeting people, how to meet them, how to maintain a good pleasant conversation with them, what to chat about, what not to chat about, what are the tips to make a good conversationalist. So do mention any questions that you want to ask at this point. You can always ask your questions, and we can give you a few clarifications and answer all your questions as the session is going on. And if there are any questions that you would like to ask. And another thing I forgot to mention is, when you're giving your handshake, you do need to maintain eye contact with that person. That's a very, very important part of shaking hands. You can't look here and look there. You can only look at the person who you're shaking hands with. Only that makes him feel important, and it makes him feel that you're interested in meeting him or greeting him. The other thing is, sometimes people are unsure of whether to take your hand or not. So in that case, it's better then, if he's not looking comfortable to shake your hand and he's keeping it behind his back, then it's just better to say hello without opting for a handshake. Sometimes people don't give their hand to shake because they have this problem of having a sweaty hand. So they don't want to give their hand to shake, and they will put it behind their back and say, hi, how are you? In that case, obviously you will not immediately push your hand out because he may feel a little uncomfortable, and so you will just follow suit. But most of the time it is noticed that men and today in the business world like to give a handshake. So I have a few questions, so we can definitely go through them and see what the answers I can give you. The first one is, when should we say how are you doing? So when are we going to say how are you doing? As I said, it's a little bit more of a casual scenario. Try not to use this when you're going for a meeting, a business meeting, or if you're going for an interview, or if you're going to meet an important person who is going to probably have an impact on something that you're planning to do. This is more for a slightly informal kind of meeting. How you doing is very informal. You could talk to a friend's friend, like how are you doing, and that's fine. You can talk to even a professor, may not be how are you doing, you will probably say how are you, but how are you doing is a little more casual. So when you're meeting people in a very casual scenario, then you can say how are you doing. The other question is, when should we say pleasure to meet you? Now, pleasure to meet you is in an interview, right? At the end, you finish the interview and you can definitely say it's a pleasure to have met you. Now, obviously the interviewer knows now that you have enjoyed meeting with him and talking to him, so pleasure to meet you can definitely be said at the end over there. Sometimes even when you are meeting somebody important who's come to perhaps your college and he's going to leave now, you can definitely meet him for a few minutes and say, it was a pleasure to have met you today and I look forward to meeting you again soon. Even that will make him feel very important. We say this pleased to meet you too and pleasure to meet you when you want to make the person feel very important. And remember, people like to feel important, especially when you're conversing with them. They want to feel very important, and that is why you will mention things like pleasure to meet you and pleased to meet you too in situations like that. You want to boost up their self-esteem and their, you want them to make them feel important, and that's why you will say pleased to meet you. Remember, even these words, when you're saying these words, you do need to make sure you're looking at the person when you're saying the words, because if you don't look at the person, then the words sound not very meaningful. If I'm looking somewhere else and saying pleased to meet you, he may not really understand how important the essence of the words are. So these words, all these words that we have mentioned, whether it's a good morning, whether it's a pleased to meet you, whether it's goodbye, everything should be while you're looking at the person, and it makes that much more important, that much more believability when you're looking at the person. So it was wonderful to have spent this time talking a little bit about greetings and meetings, and I look forward to seeing you again in another session. Thank you all very much.